Are you one of the few people that still has hope for Marvel, or are you on the other end where you've kind of given up all hope? Well, stay tuned because Marvel just released yet its latest movie in Thunderbolts, and we are here to give you all the spoilers. Welcome back to Spoiler Alert. I'm your host, Sheldon, here with Evan every week, ready to give you some spoilers. And this week, we have the latest Marvel movie to talk about with Thunderbolts. Now, Evan, we've had this movie on our list of anticipated movies for quite some time now, particularly since that first trailer got released, because I think that first trailer was very well done.
I agree.
And it got us all hyped for it. And if you've been following our channel for a while, you know we like to review movies before we go into movies. So last week, we kind of got caught up on the characters in Thunderbolts. So if you haven't given that a listen yet, go be sure to listen to that and hear our thoughts. But it's finally here. After it was announced several years ago, we finally have been treated to the latest in the Marvel slop, as it has lately been, kind of a slop. But it was kind of a surprise for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
So,
and I'm happy about it. Very happy about it.
The thing about the Thunderbolts, okay, so if you're not familiar with this story, right? So before we start talking about Thunderbolts, let's talk about what's coming, the news that we've seen.
So we saw, I think it was Robert Downey Jr. and the Russo brothers both posted a picture of Victor Van Doom's film chair saying 1 year away or like just started filming. And we both were very confused and concerned because they're still planning on their May 26th release date. And they're just going through filming now. We're just getting set up with these characters. What?
They're very ambitious. That's all I'm going to say is to be able to have just started literally just days ago, shooting a movie of this size, right? This is going to be a fat movie.
It's an Avengers scale movie because it's
right. Think about what Avengers Endgame or Infinity War was. You got this massive cast of characters. You have what's probably going to be.
I don't think this cast will be as big.
I don't know, but
personally, from like what we've seen in Thunderbolts and what we're going to.
What I do know is you're balancing a lot of schedules with a lot of actors, big actors. You're probably looking at what they're shooting for, I'm sure, is probably a 2.5 to 3 hour movie. Plus, you've got a ton of post-production work to do. Because, I mean, it's a Marvel movie. The visual effects are very heavy.
Yep.
So, I think the May 2026 release date is very ambitious.
I hope that they delay it for the
sake of giving them some actual time.
Be like, hey, we're going to push it to, I think if they pushed it to like a December date, and
I think the only problem is that May is such a big, that is the prime time release window is May because it's really what kicks off your summer movies.
Summer. Yeah, I don't disagree, but
the first week in May and the last week in May with Memorial Day are like your prime time slots for movies.
That's why this timing was so perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's why all of the previous Avengers are released in that first weekend of May.
Or that April time.
Yeah.
Right, which I get, but weekend. I hope that they want to put, I mean, I'm not saying that the Russo brothers aren't going to put effort because they've done a great job with a lot of the Marvel films.
They've done, I think, arguably some of the best Marvel movies.
I 100% agree, but it's just the timing of it, the logistics. Like, everybody's going to be basically working 80, 90-hour weeks. You're talking post-production team, filming, the actors. Like, it's going to be so much just for a film that they could have been like, hey, we're going to have this come out. Even if it was 2027, I'd understand that. Yes, I'd have to wait 2 years.
And that's the thing, too, is you got to take that into consideration that we have Secret Wars that comes out in 2027.
Another year after.
That they will start filming that very shortly after Doomsday wraps.
I think that they are going to do something similar where it's, I don't know how they're going to tie it in, but like Infinity War and Endgame were both, like they finished filming Infinity War. They had a little bit of a break and then they just kept going. Yeah. And that's what they're going to have to do here, which basically means for the next year and a half, it's going to be literally just filming, post-production, filming again, and then post-production
It'll be interesting. Because I don't even know what the timeline was like with Infinity War and Endgame. I don't know when they started filming those movies, but either way, it's a tight production schedule, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm not too excited about it.
Maybe that, or maybe we're just used to movies like Captain America: Brave New World, where it shot like 7 years ago, and then after a million reshoots, they finally decided to release it.
I don't know. Honestly, they could produce a movie pretty quick. Like, I'm not saying that they can't, but it's just a really bad.
But that's
time
even
for
another
them
thing to consider too is reshoots. Most movies, especially big blockbuster movies, have a lot of reshoots, and so
I mean,
I don't know.
It sounds like they're assuming that they're just going to go through, do almost like an audience score, and they're going to be like, yeah, that's perfect, and they won't have to do reshoots because they probably won't have time to do reshoots.
At least not without delaying it or severely rushing it. So I don't know. We'll see.
Which is stupid.
We'll
Anyway,
see. But I think it's something to look forward to.
I 100% agree. I think it'll be fun. We get to see a lot of the cast, new and old, returning, which is really, really fun. I'm really interested on how Robert Downey Jr.'s approach is going to be with Victor Von Doom.
You mean in how it's going to be where he's actually going to be a different character, not just be Tony Stark?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that like he can't act, but I just think it's a very poor choice for them to bring him back.
I agree
not
because
that I don't love Robert Downey Jr.
No,
I'm clearly an Iron Man
everybody
fan.
who's been following the Marvel Universe since Iron Man only sees Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man now.
So them casting him as a completely different role, not that he can't do a good job or he won't, but from a viewer perspective,
it's going to be hard.
Yeah, they're going to walk in and be like, he doesn't have his snarky comments. He's not like walking around with this ambition. Victor Van Doom or Von Doom is a very different type of character than Tony Stark.
It's going to be kind of the same deal with recastings, right? Recastings are hard to get behind because as a viewer, it's very disjolting to see someone who's supposed to be the same character, but it's played by a different actor. Yeah. And I think it's going to be kind of have that same effect where it's supposed to be a different character, but it's the same actor.
Exactly. I don't know. I'm not too happy about it, but that was probably the latest Marvel news that we've seen. There hasn't really been much else that's come out. It's been
interesting to follow the storyline there. But with all that said, Marvel is moving full head of steam on Avengers Doomsday, so we'll see what actually happens.
Whatever.
But with all that going on, they did just release Thunderbolts, which Evan and I had the opportunity to go see.
Yes.
And I will start by saying that it was very different than I expected, but not different in necessarily a bad way.
It was a different type of film. Nice. But I think that we were both expecting that. Right, this type of approach with these actors and kind of what they were achieving, they achieved, right? They wanted it to be a little bit more of this, like, here's 5 dumbasses. They're going to have to try and do something, and good luck.
Well, 6 until, spoiler alert, someone died. And who called that? That was me.
Yeah, well, we kind of knew that from watching the trailers.
Indeed. So, Evan, let's start us off. So Thunderbolts, if you aren't already aware, Thunderbolts follows the story of several people we've already been introduced to throughout the Marvel Universe, including John Walker, also known as the former second Captain America.
I think that his title in this, it was called U.S. Agent.
Yes.
I believe so. And then
Bucky Barnes.
Winter Soldier.
Yelena
is a Black Widow.
Yelena from Black Widow.
She's just a widow. I don't think she's called the Black Widow. I think she's literally just called the Widow.
Red Guardian, also from Black Widow. Taskmaster, also from Black Widow. And then Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp.
And then we get introduced to Bob.
It follows these 6 individuals who are put into a situation where they have to work together, overcome their past problems, and defeat sadness.
That's actually a really good way of describing it because it kind of is, which we'll explain in a second.
You probably heard the memes and seen things on YouTube where movies are solved through the power of love and the power of friendship. Spoiler alert, that's kind of how it works out in Thunderbolts, but it's in a way that works considering all that happens in the movie and the way they're building up to it.
Yeah.
So don't get turned off by that fact. If you see other reviewers give that a negative star because of it, that's not a good reason because it actually works in the context of this story.
They probably suck.
This story actually makes it work. So before we give you all the spoilers, let's talk about some of the good things. So Evan, give me some of your pros, what you liked with this movie, why people should take the time to go see it.
It's a good reintroduction of what a Marvel movie should be, just right off the bat, right? We both walked out of it and we were both like, all right, that was good. That was fun. And especially with Marvel's really bad past recently with a lot of their very interesting decisions that they've made show-wise and movies. Going and walking out of this movie and having the score that we'll go through and being pleasantly surprised to be like, you know what? I do want to go see that again. That fact of being like, I want to go see that movie again because that's how much I enjoyed it was refreshing. And of course, it's setting up some of the new movies, which I'm very excited about because that's what we've been lacking in the entire universe.
That's what I was going to say. Is my first pro I'd give it is that it felt like it was part of a larger universe and that it's setting up story for the next movie. And it is. Which is what Marvel built its success on.
Marvel's been doing from the day which, as of this filming, it was exactly 17 years ago that Iron Man came out.
Right. So think about that. Think about 17 years ago, we had in the theater that post-credit scene where Nick Fury walks in. He says,
talking to Tony Stark,
talks about the Avengers Initiative. You knew from that moment on they've been building up towards things,
and that he was going to be talking and working with different individuals to create something for this bigger picture.
Right. And so from that moment on, Marvel has built its identity on the idea that there's this interconnected universe that you have to go see every movie, otherwise you're going to miss an important piece of that story.
Yep.
That has been severely lacking. I feel like Thunderbolts is a good step in the right direction for that.
It is. And I think that they did play this movie a little safe in some aspects, but I do love that because that's kind of what Marvel's supposed to be. And they did exactly what I was hoping for. I walked out very pleasant, but overall them setting up, hey, this is how the next film, kind of this next little era of movies are going to look. I was very pleased. Very, very pleased.
And the thing too is it's a very interesting movie because yes, it's a Marvel movie, right? It's got its kind of crazy action. It's got its generic humor. And it's got its interconnected storytelling, which is what Marvel was built on, all of these different elements. But with all that said, it still is a very different movie in that it's got some very heavy themes at times because the movie deals a lot with kind of self-worth and depression.
I mean, from the very beginning and throughout the entire movie, we learn and see that all of these basically anti-heroes who basically turn into heroes are all technically alone in their own world. And it capitalizes on you don't have anybody to go to, and it shows this really good grayscale and this depression of all of the characters and what they've been through and really what's basically all led them to finally being like, all right, fine, we have to come together. I hate you, but we have to do this together.
Right. That's kind of the main theme of the movie is that not to, and I thought it was a really good theme, especially for people who might be struggling with that sort of thing, to be able to go to a Marvel movie and be able to get a good message from that's not just dumb generic superhero movies, which that's what Marvel is and they're fun, but I still thought it was nice to be able to have
more of a meaning to it.
I thought it was nice to have a story that had a theme that was a good theme that said don't beat yourself up, don't hate on yourself just because you made the mistakes in the past, right? And so even considering it is a Marvel movie, it was very emotional at times for that reason,
which I appreciate. And I feel like that's why a lot of critics have decided to score it really high. I will get into that why, but I do think that it's a lot more relatable than just like a superhero movie where we're like, oh, we support and we love these characters because we followed them through the universe. It's like, yes, but also they're dealing with problems that are relatable to the consumer and the viewer that people were able to actually watch, listen, and pay attention and be like, this is very common for these people because we've been able to portray them in a very sad and depressive state that we can now be like, hey, I align with that. That makes sense. And it helps us be able to literally follow the movie better.
And I like that ultimately the message of the movie. And people are going to hate on it. People are going to love it for the reason. But I thought it was very good that the message of the movie was that you need each other as people. Just as people, you need to be able to have connection in order to grow because I mean, the villain of the movie is called the Void, which is essentially a person's darker side of themselves, which is Bob, played by Bill Pullman. Bill Pullman, not Bill
Lewis.
Pullman. Lewis Pullman.
Bill?
Son of Bill Pullman.
What?
And he looks just like him.
He does.
President from Independence Day. Great movie.
What about Independence Day Resurgence?
Oh boy. We can't talk about that here. Not now. No. Not here, not now. Anyway, you got Bob. Yeah. So Bob is someone who's going through those same kind of things that our main characters are going through. And he has been used in some different human experimentation projects to essentially create a super soldier. But with that comes a side effect that Bob has also been a very emotionally unstable person.
From the beginning. And we learned that through the movie, which I think is...
Which he does a great job in that.
I love Lewis Pullman.
Lewis Pullman in that role really shows... He has such a wide range in that character because... It shows someone who is clearly dealing with depression and struggling with
himself,
hating himself essentially. Yeah. But then on the other side, just even in the same scene, you can see his highs where he's confident, he's happy.
Yeah.
And then when he becomes Sentry, right? Which is like essentially like Marvel's Superman.
Yeah.
In a sense, he is confident. He's got a little darker side to him that is cocky in a sense.
He shines his charisma.
You see a big range of his ability to act, more so than I think you saw in like Top Gun Maverick, because he didn't have that big a role in Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
But he was definitely a bright side of this movie,
which I loved.
And it worked out really well. So overall, I think one of the big pluses, which I know people are going to criticize it for, but I thought one of the big pluses was that the theme of the movie was very good, which was just the idea of stop hating on yourself and connect with other people to be able to get past this
depressive state.
Depressive state that everybody is subject to, right? Everybody at times has those days where they're down on themselves. And I thought because of that, that's a very relatable thing that people are going to relate to forever.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if you talk about when COVID happened, everybody was at home and that kind of depressive state was at an all-time high.
Right, because
yesterday, 10 years from now.
There were movies that did that, and you watch them now, you're like, okay, so what? No big deal. But something like this, where that is the theme of the movie, that's something that's going to be very present forever, because we're humans. And so we're going to have that. And so I thought that was a very good decision to be able to incorporate that in a way that was accessible to audiences around the world, because it's a Marvel movie.
Still enjoyable.
Exactly.
I think that was the biggest thing, because there's a lot of those movies that you could go see. Like I recently watched Beautiful Boy with Timothée Chalamet and Steve Carell. And it's very similar, where he's in a very depressive state, going through drug addiction and everything. But it's a very sad, heartfelt movie. This was still like you walked out, you understood the message, and it was still fun.
Yeah.
But then you were also still like, that was a great movie. And you still have that like lightheartedness.
Which is why I think it worked, is because it did a really good job of balancing that humor with the gravity of the situation.
I 100% agree.
Now, another pro I'll give this movie is the casting. The casting for this movie is incredible.
100%. Without the cast, this movie would not be anywhere near the score. Even if they had still great actors, the people that they casted from the beginning, we're talking Ghost, not really Taskmaster, Red Guardian, Yelena, Bucky, Wyatt Russell, and Lewis Pullman. If they didn't have those original 6 as this cast, it would definitely not have been.
Yeah, and there's problems, which we'll get to when we get to the cons. I think there's problems in the plot structure that would have been have manifested itself more if it was a different cast that didn't have the charisma and the ability to make you relate. Like what these actors brought, I feel like, was a sense of they're just humans.
Yeah.
They made you
some
feel
of
like
them
they're
were a
just
little
regular
bit more
people.
super than others, but you could still see people were struggling with their depression. Somebody lost, their wife in a divorce. Their parents are dead. They're, not able to be into the world by themselves, right? Like all of these people have their own real struggles that people can actually understand and relate to.
And I thought the actors did a really good job of actually just bring that home.
They did
my standout, kind of like last week when we talked about Black Widow, my standout absolutely has to be Red Guardian. David Harbour is Red Guardian. He does incredible in that role.
I love David Harbour.
He has so much fun playing that role. You can tell.
He was able to have his basically creative freedom and literally do what he wanted. And you understand and you know that he was like, I want to do this. And they're like, okay. And he was just able to be dumb and enjoyed every single
he does such a wonderful job in it. He's so likable, and he's absolutely brings the biggest humor element to the story.
100%.
Just because of the way his character is.
Yeah.
But definitely a big standout. I also think Wyatt Russell did really good.
I do
agree
with
I really
that.
like Wyatt Russell as John Walker.
I do think, when we talked about the show, I think that he did a really good job of portraying this really big cocky character who got this great role that people kind of like grew and be like, oh, we hate him. And I feel like that's a really good depiction, because walking into this, people are, as a whole, like for the people in the universe, they still see him as the Captain America that literally murdered somebody in cold blood on camera, basically.
Well, like you said in the movie, define cold blood, or define innocent.
Well, I'm just saying that like he still murdered somebody.
Yeah,
right
as far as the people in the universe.
Yeah, they see that. So like, I think that Wyatt Russell's character did a really good job. He also struggles with a lot, and mean, like we just said, right? We see these people's struggles through the movie of what they've been going through, what's happened the past year or 2 years since we last saw or noticed them. And it's quite interesting. And I really like it.
I think an aspect I really liked is you really saw a lot of different kinds of way people are dealing with their own loneliness and their own self-doubt.
Yep.
So with Wyatt Russell, with John Walker, you see someone who almost projects things he hates about himself onto other people. He is kind of a douche to other people.
He tries to be a bit of a prick.
Yeah.
Just to like make him feel
exactly.
light.
So there's that way of dealing with that sort of thing. But then you have Bob, who kind of goes down the dark route. He's thinking, okay, nobody needs me. I'm okay to die. That sort of thing where he's dealing with that.
Yeah.
Right. Two different ways to deal with that. But then you have Yelena, who even you can see by the way her character's written, but also just the movie, is the kind of person that instead of dealing with it, she just buries it, which she even says. You just stuff it down.
And she like makes a joke about it, and it basically lives off that plot for quite a while. Where she's like, yeah, if you're struggling, she's like, you just push it down really low and forget about it.
And
like,
so
she says that.
That's, I think, a very good way that they depicted how these different characters struggle with the same thing, but deal with it in a different way.
100%.
And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why all the characters work and they feel so different from each other, is because you can tell they're different people dealing with the same thing in a different way.
Yeah.
So I thought it worked really well. What are some of the other pros?
I really like the score. I know that you were kind of like, eh. I thought that they did a good job where it felt very fitting. But on the score side, since there's not really too much to talk about on that, I really loved, I don't know if you paid attention, but when they finally saved Bob or Sentry and they come out, the grayscale changed drastically. And I was watching for that because I noticed and I was like, hey, this is where if they're, really paying attention, the audience would be able to see this. And it was really fun because in the very beginning, it was very cloudy, rainy, kind of like a depressing New York City vibe. And then when Sentry and Bob and everybody gets out, they're able to walk around. The sun is out and there's not like a single cloud in the sky. And I thought that was a really good depiction.
I didn't notice that.
I thought that was a great depiction of them being like, hey, this light has been lifted. Mm-hmm. And it kind of finally showed this like, hey, and they all kind of like were able to handshake and like hug and give each other this like, hey, you know what? It's okay, man. Because
as you said in the spoilers, right? Spoiler alert. Sentry, also known as Bob, right, the experiment guy, has a darker side. Something like that. I think he has a darker side, which is called the Void, which is they didn't really explain that. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, you kind of have to know the character a bit more.
Essentially, it's, and I don't know how to explain it because it wasn't very well explained to the movie.
It's basically Sentry's like an invincible man, but since he struggles so much with depression and like kind of his self-worth because of his childhood, which we see a glimpse of where he was like, I'm in peace. This is my safe spot and it's really quiet. The only thing that he heard or sees was his dad coming home after like a long day of work and beating on the family. And that was his like, this is where I'm peaceful and I can die here and like this and this.
Yeah.
But the Void is basically just this depressive version of him that kind of was just, it's almost like intrusive thoughts just basically kicked in. And then he was just like, okay. Like he didn't want to fight it anymore, where he just kind of accepted like, hey, I'm sad, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
All right, so be it.
So it's kind of an interesting way for a Marvel movie to go because it's not it doesn't have your generic
superhero kill
last
super
big action
villain, woo!
Skybeam, explosions type of finale. Because that's why as I said earlier, this movie literally is solved by the power of friendship, but because the movie's building up to that. It's focusing on someone who was experimented on, who has a darker side because of what he's been through and how he feels about himself. And the only way to defeat that, instead of punching and beating him up, is we're working together.
To be like, hey, we're going to be here together. And I think that it was really fun because we saw really subtle hints of it at the beginning where Yelena was really friendly to Bob, where she was like, hey, it's okay. I'll help you. Like, just work with us and you'll be okay. Like, don't worry. And like, you could see that all of the characters kind of wanted to help each other. Like you could just kind of see deep down inside, they all wanted to have that good core, but then it just took them a while to kind of get that courage of being like, hey, I'll ask for your help, or yes, I'll work with you, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So
now, with that said, the fact that it doesn't really end in this big, action spectacle,
it does end in a really
the
fun
action
way.
was really good in this movie. They did a lot of practical action. I mean, as much as Marvel practical action goes,
But there was a lot of it that was choreographed.
yeah, there was
And
a
they
lot
did a
that
good job.
They did really good. I think a highlight for me is the desert sequence, the car chase when Bucky shows up.
Mhm.
So that was a lot of fun. They shot that on location right here in our home state of Utah,
Which is kind of fun.
which was kind of fun to learn. But
Yeah, I didn't see that until the credits were rolling. I was like,
and so I thought that was really interesting. Is they did do a good job of actually doing a lot of practical action set pieces as
which I
opposed
thought was
to
fun.
throwing everybody in front of a green screen. Which there's still a good amount of visual effects, and you can tell at some points that there are visual effects because every movie has visual effects.
Yeah.
But I think that the action was done very well, even if it wasn't as much as I expected it to be. Like, I thought there was going to be more action. There wasn't, but it worked in the way
I was going to say, like, they made it look a lot in the trailers like it was just going to be a lot of just like punch, shoot. I think that was what Elena said. She's like, so what? We all just punch and shoot?
Yeah.
Which was kind of funny, which was true, but they did a really good job with a lot of the scenes choreographed wise. I really like the scene where they're all fighting Sentry. And I think that they took a little bit out of some of the other film companies, like books, where they just basically kept the camera on Sentry the entire time.
Yeah.
But it kind of just slowly faded out.
Yeah,
but
it was
it
a very-
didn't move where it wouldn't like.
It was a
you
very
didn't see Bucky
interesting-
running and then jump. It just.
It was a
like,
very
kept
interesting
on.
oneer. That's what they usually call them. Like,
Thank
it's
you.
The
I
long
don't
take.
my brain.
But it's very interesting the way that they did that, I thought.
Yeah, I thought that
but
was
it
fun.
worked
Anyway.
out.
There's a lot of pros about this movie. I will say that, and I'm very happy.
Anything else that you would mention before we go into the cons?
Honestly, overall, I was very satisfied, and I think that they did a great job of saying, "Hey, here's a fun superhero movie. Here's a Marvel movie. This is what it should look like." But here's also a really modern day problem that these dumbasses solved together,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was fantastic. Like, it was beautiful writing, and
I do
give them
really like
was
that, and I would
amazing.
especially recommend just to anybody who feels like they might be struggling with that to go see this movie because of that message that it has. It's stop beating yourself up over your past mistakes. And
100%.
find someone to connect with, and then improve. Work
Yeah.
on yourself and with someone else instead of going into the void, right?
Which is
Going
basically
into
just
this-
your depressive self curling up. I see it like a turtle, right? You just go into your shell and you just sit there.
And I think we need more of that in today's world. Especially, we need more of that. Now, all that said, all of those pros, which there were a lot, I did like this movie. There are a few cons. Do you have any cons that you would want to mention?
The only really big con that I did notice, also before we do, I love the way that this movie basically comes to the end of all of the Thunderbolts basically going after Valentina, being like, you suck. And then they literally come into this light, but she's, of course, the entire movie.
She's a politician, so she's
always been
sides.
very sleek and very smart. And then she's like, look at this. It's the new Avengers. How perfect timing is that? And they're all right there ready to kill her. But now these cameras are on them. They've got this public facing. So then they just have to stand there and smile. And then the movie basically ends. And I was like, that is such a perfect, like, sleek ending.
And then they did the little Avengers theme, and it kind of gives you the nostalgia.
Yeah.
And the nostalgia feels. So
Yeah.
that was fun.
I did also love the post-credit scene. I thought that was really fun. I was very happy about that.
Spoiler alert.
We finally get some other
Fantastic
movie
Four
people.
idea.
Let's just say that it was a fantastic. It was just fantastic. We'll just say that.
And it was it was spoiled for me because
I knew that
I
it
knew that
was.
they were going to do the Fantastic
I didn't know
Four
how they were
cameo
going to
just
do it, though.
because on the end credits, one of the songs that was credited
It
said
said
Fantastic Four theme.
I
I'm
noticed
like,
that too. And me and
means
Colin went.
That means they're going to show something about Fantastic Four.
I also knew that they would, especially since that's the only other major Marvel movie coming out. That I was like, it would be
Yeah, because
the dumbest idea if they were like, "Here's this," and then we're like, have no clue what's going on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So it's very interesting. That said,
being said,
let's talk about some cons.
I did think that the two weird scenes that I wasn't a huge fan of is number one, how quickly Bucky goes from like, I've got to go basically now hunt and kill these guys to like, fine, come help me. I thought that wasn't very well.
It wasn't natural.
Yeah, it didn't. It felt like more like where he was just he's like, listen here, you dumbasses. I've got to take you in because I'm a senator, blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, all right, Bucky, da, da, da. And then 30 seconds later, he gets a call from this one dumbass, stupid person who works with Valentina, her assistant. And then he's like, you know what? You're going to help me. And they're like, what? Us? And he goes, yeah. You got somewhere better to be in this than the
So it was very interesting. And I think, I
thought that they didn't really do a good job of they could have just done a little bit more dialogue, maybe spent an extra minute on kind of that scene.
My biggest con, which is kind of related to that, is that this movie is essentially a 2-act movie instead of a 3-act movie.
Which I enjoyed.
So this movie, the first half is about, the Thunderbolt, what you see in the trailer, right? The Thunderbolts going to this vault, meeting each other, and then breaking out. And then the second half is them going to New York to take down Valentina. But there's not really there's not something that bridges that.
I was going to say my other con was when they all finally decide to team up, it kind of just then cuts to them all in this truck driving through New York. And I was like, they didn't really set that up that well personally.
That's my biggest problem, is that it felt like it went from the opening sequence to the ending sequence, and there wasn't a bridge to bridge that gap.
I think
it felt like it was missing a big chunk of the movie.
I did like how there were only really 2 arcs, and they did a really good job at capitalizing with that. Of, hey, this is your main scene, basically in Utah in the vault, and then of course your New York scene, and they did a really good job at capitalizing on those locations, and I love that. But I do agree that there wasn't a really good way of them kind of saying, hey, we're in the middle of this desert. Oh, okay, now we're actually in a truck heading to New York. And they didn't really, even if it was 30 seconds or a minute of something random or weird that just showed them connecting onto their route there, I would have understood it a little bit more, but it kind of just
it was very interesting.
Yeah.
I think it was very similar. If you watched our review for Last Breath, it was very similar to that, where it felt like, at least for me anyways, it wasn't a complete story in the sense that it were major sequences, but it wasn't like a 3-act type of thing. So, I mean, I think a good example would be my favorite movies, the Mission Impossible movies. Those are very good at establishing your different acts of the movie just by having these long sequences that feel like it has a very definite beginning, middle, and end. This one didn't feel like it had a definite beginning, middle, and end. It just felt like it had a beginning and it had an end. There wasn't any middle to bridge that.
See, I semi-understand that, yeah. But speaking of Mission Impossible, I'm really excited. Of course, I know that you are too. But they have a lot to cover in that movie, a lot of literal ground.
So do we. We got a lot of movies to watch and review over the next 2 weeks.
True.
Now, my last con I would give to this movie, because there's really not that many. I thought it was a good movie for what it was.
100% agree.
But I think they spent too much time on Valentina, who's the girl who kind of is organizing them together. And I would have spent more time with the Thunderbolts themselves, because they had so much chemistry, especially when they finally got together. They were so much fun to watch and be with. And I think it would have been better had you spent
I
more
feel like
time
they did.
that.
I feel like they did a pretty decent job at us establishing and seeing how Valentina is, because then it started to grow and have us think and see, hey, she's kind of this slick idiot who actually doesn't give a shit about them. She's just there for basically the glory and the fame at the end of the day and everything. But
For the glory.
But I get that. I understand it. I don't think that that's true on my side, but
Wow.
I get it.
Wow. Here you are disagreeing with everything I say. Well, let's talk about our ratings. So we have to rate this movie. Before that, we're going to refresh you on our Marvel scale. This one right here is my scale. So just if you need a reference for how I rate Marvel movies, I have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness as a 3 stars on my scale. I don't think it was a very good movie. We can talk about that another day. I have the first Ant-Man as a 6.5. Not a bad movie, not a great movie. And then as a 9.5, I have Avengers Infinity War.
Yeah, not bad. And then I did Wakanda Forever as a 4, which, I mean, right, it's just hard. We talked about recasting, which they kind of had to basically just change their entire script when Chadwick Boseman passed away, which was really sad. But they also didn't have to make the movie. That's crazy to say or think, but what? You don't actually have to make movies. And then Iron Man 3, I thought was good. It wasn't as good as 1 or 2 in my book. I thought it was still great, but
we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
What?
Just go on. We're talking about Thunderbolts today. We'll talk about Iron Man another day. Maybe in our prep.
And then, of course, another perfect 10 is No Way Home. For me, that does also hold a special place in my heart for when I went and saw it. like just where I was at in my life, and that was a refreshing day. It brought life back to my life.
It was a fun time. So with that, Thunderbolts. How do Sheldon and Evan rate Thunderbolts? Well, I gave this movie a 7.5.
Yep.
I think it was good. I would recommend watching. I'd recommend going to see it in the theater. Evan, tell us about your rating.
I gave it an 8. I did enjoy it. I mean, I really didn't have as many cons as you did, and I guarantee you that's where our 0.5% came from.
I'm sure.
I didn't really notice or care as much about that bridge aspect. I understand it, but for me, that grayscale, like, you'll go see it again. I can almost guarantee you in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll probably go see it again just for fun, because I know that I will. When you do, pay attention to that, and you'll see the first thing that you see is you'll see the shadow of people. That's what I noticed, right? Because we see this literal death shadow of people, and then when they're out, we see the sunlight shining with them, and you see their actual shadow, meaning like they're brought back, and it's like this happy reliving moment. And I thought that was a great depiction that we related to. So for me, I gave it an 8 because I was very, very pleased.
Yeah,
I
was too. I went
call
out
it
of
a great
theater
because it was great.
I was very happy with what it turned out to be. Sure, there was things I would improve
100%.
on, but I mean,
I don't believe people that are saying that it's a 9.5 or a 10 because they're either dumb, a degenerate, or they actually haven't seen movies
Very
before.
interesting. What I can
think it was
say,
great, but it's not to the scale of others. I
This
love
movie-
the message that it brought more
Yeah.
than anything, and that's why I have it as a high scale, because if it didn't have that message, we would both be rating it a lot lower.
well, it was still a good movie,
Well,
but
I understand, but like I'd probably be closer to like a 6.5 or a 7 if it didn't have this good message behind it. You know what I'm saying?
what I will say, this movie wasn't Captain America: Brave New World, so that in and of
God.
itself is an extra.
I want to
extra
fight
star.
whoever put that movie as a 10.
Very sad, very sad. How do our ratings hold up to the rest of the world? Well,
So far,
IMDb has got it at a solid 7.8.
In
Rotten
Rotten
Tomatoes,
Tomatoes-
it's holding up as an 88%, which is
okay, that's
pretty
better
high.
because at first it was like a 99%, and I was like, all right, y'all.
All right, everybody, chill
Okay.
out. Chill out.
Yeah, I was like, all right, critics, it's great, but I'm not bashing on it at all. I think everybody needs to go see this movie, enjoy the soundtrack, enjoy the characters, enjoy the true, relatable story that this movie brings to people, but I don't believe that it's in that 9.5, 10 perfect category of movies, personally.
I agree. You heard the man. Definitely go see this movie. It was a good
Yes.
movie, a good watch, a good
Beautiful.
movie to keep the theater industry going. Because as we always say, seeing movies in the theaters is just not the same as seeing it in your home or seeing it anywhere else. It's just a different experience, and it's
we
fun.
finally have a movie that's setting us up to actually be excited for what's coming for Fantastic Four
Oh boy,
and Doomsday.
that's true. And it's a good change. It's a good change for Marvel. Hopefully it keeps going in that direction, but who knows? It might be too little too late. We'll see. But with that said, let us know in the comments if you've seen Thunderbolts. Let us know what you think. If you're going to go see it, then let us know after that what you thought of it. And be sure to always catch our spoilers right here on Spoiler Alert. We'll catch you next week when we start our Mission Impossible marathon.
Journey. Let's go.
That's going to be exciting. So be sure to tune in. We'll catch you next time on Spoiler Alert.